Kindred UMC live show features adults discussing adult topics, occasionally with adult language. It may not be suitable for young viewers. Please use discretion before watching.
Hello all, welcome once again to the Kindred UMC live show. Oh man. Welcome once again to the Kindred UMC pre-recorded live show. My name is Chris Hayden. I'm the pastor of Kindred UMC.
Hi, I'm Courtney Young. I'm the director of community engagement at Kindred UMC.
And I'm Preston, and that's about it.
You need to start Love is Blind. How have you not started it yet?
Like the phrase?
No, like the show. It's where people go into these pods and they like date without ever seeing each other, and then they have to get engaged.
Okay, so we're in technically our third week of Lent. It's a weird recording schedule, but hopefully you will have checked out our Ash Thursday live stream. If you haven't, it's on the channel. Just go look at our last video and see what we did. I don't even know exactly what we're going to do yet. It's exciting. We're traveling through time in this very moment right now. So we're going to continue our march through Mark with our series, The Week Of. We're looking at the week and the events in the days leading up to the trial and crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christus. And we are going to continue with Mark chapter 11, verses 12 through 25. All right, and I'm going to continue my attempt to try and talk about what's going to happen here. Okay, so we're going to read a story that is in another story. And Mark does this like a few times. He starts one story, and then in the middle of that story, he starts telling a different story, and then finishes the other story.
And people wonder why we have attention problems.
Well, it begs the question of why does Mark do this? What do these two stories have to do with each other? So the first story is about a fig tree that is not producing fruit, and Jesus curses it. Then Jesus goes into the temple where they're selling doves and different things for people to sacrifice. And he gets really mad and he turns the tables over and chases people out with a whip. And he quotes a very important prophecy from Isaiah and Jeremiah. And we're going to talk about that. Then on their way out, they come across that fig tree again, and it's died because Jesus cursed it. And so now it's withered up and died. And then Jesus makes some statements about praying for what you believe in and having the faith to move mountains. Okay? So here we go. Chapter 11, verse 12 sounds like this. On the following day, so the following day, the one we just read was the Palm Sunday text. So this is the day after. On the following day, when they came from Bethany, he was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see whether perhaps he would find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. He said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard it. Then they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves, and he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching and saying, "Is it not written," this is the prophecy I was talking about from Isaiah and Jeremiah, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of robbers." And when the chief priests and the scribes heard it, they kept looking for a way to kill him, for they were afraid of him, because the whole crowd was spellbound by his teaching. And when evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. So they pass the fig tree. They go into the temple. He turns over the tables, teaches in the temple from the old prophets, and then the chief priests want to kill him because he's doing so good. Now they're leaving, and in the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree withered away to its roots. Then Peter remembered and said to him, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered." Jesus answered them, "Have faith in God. truly I tell you, if you say to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and if you do not doubt in your heart, but believe that what you say will come to pass, it will be done for you. So I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. Whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father in heaven may also forgive you your trespasses. Okay, so two different stories. We got the fig tree, then the temple, and he drives people out, and then we got the follow-up on the fig tree. Okay, so there's a couple things we got to break down here. First of all, the prophets that he quotes from, and I made notes because I want to make sure I get these details right. So it's two different phrases. One is from the book of Isaiah, and one is from the book of Jeremiah. And the one from Isaiah is basically it's quoting from a section of the prophecy where Isaiah says, God is saying, my house is a house of prayer for all nations, for everyone. My house is for everyone. The chosen people, and I choose everyone, is the point of Isaiah, and especially in that section. And then Jeremiah, when he's the den of robbers, you've made my temple a den of robbers. To paraphrase that section of Jeremiah, essentially what he's saying is, so people were acting, the chief priests and the people who ran the temple were essentially taking advantage of and saying, like God can't destroy the temple, we're God's chosen people. And the prophet Jeremiah says on behalf of God, you think I won't destroy the temple? Of course I'll destroy my temple. You've made it a den of robbers, and I will put it down like a dog. You think I won't destroy it because I love it? I will exactly destroy it because I love it. That's kind of the paraphrase of that text in Jeremiah. Now, it begs the question, what is really going on with those money changers? Because there's a lot of cultural stuff that we're missing there. And essentially, the way that the law is written, particularly in the book of Leviticus, the first chapters, it's all about offerings. It's all about how you can give something and know that God will be pleased by it. And the way that those offerings are structured, it's like one for every level of society. So if you are wealthy beyond, imagination, you can bring in an ox and sacrifice it, and you can know that God will be pleased by your sacrifice. Because that was one of the other scary things, is that you never know if God's happy. And so Leviticus comes to say, you can do this, and you know that God will be pleased. But if you're, maybe struggling a little bit, well, you can bring in a dove. You can get a dove, and you know that God will be pleased just as much as the ox. And let's say you're just dirt broke poor. Well, you can go to the fields where it is legally required for farmers not to go all the way to the ends of their fields. You can go to the fields, get a free grain offering for free, and bring that in and sacrifice that, and you know that God will be pleased. And what was happening in this temple, in this time, was that the Pharisees and the scribes, the lawyers of the temple, people would bring offerings and they would say, nope, not good enough. Nope, not good enough. Blemished, not perfect, not a good enough offering, not a good enough offering. Oh, well, as long as you're making an offering, by all means, we have some doves over here for sale. Since yours isn't good enough, go ahead and purchase one of ours. And so they're running a racket. It's like organized crime here. And that's why Jesus gets so upset. And that's why he says, and he quotes, my house is a house of prayer for all nations. Everyone, regardless of creed, regardless of social status, my house is welcome and open to anyone who wishes to make an offering to Yahweh. And that's why he's so mad, and he turns over the tables and he chases them out. So now, I don't know, well, here, let me see. What do you make of the fig tree? I have some theories, but what do you make of the fig tree?
Mr. Human came out a little pettiness.
You think Jesus was being petty?
Yeah.
Do you think Mark would write a story about Jesus being petty?
I think it's obviously there's some level of metaphor in there somewhere, but I think it's the surface level is pretty.
You got to
funny.
remember, Mark. He wasn't a disciple of Jesus. He's probably a disciple of Peter, so he never met Jesus. This guy is writing a story on purpose to try and get at some theological stuff that's happening in the church. He's retelling a story for a reason. So it begs the question, why this fig tree thing, and then this temple overturning the tables thing, and then this fig tree thing? And if you'll remember, the end of that fig tree thing ends with Jesus saying, if you have faith to move mountains and believe it, then they will move. And there's something in that too. That's, I think, is, and I don't, this is all my interpretation. I'm doing my best to piece this together too. But it's there for a reason. Mark did this on purpose. He's not a bad writer. He's a good writer. That's why his book is, one of the, it's in the Bible, for God's sake, So what do you think's going on with that? So first of all, what sets him off? Why is Jesus mad about it?
He's hungry.
Yeah, but that alone isn't why. Like, he's hungry and what?
Thirsty.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? The tree or the?
Yeah. Why?
Okay,
Like,
the temple. I think you're still talking about the tree.
no, I am talking about the tree.
Okay.
Why is he angry with the tree? What has the tree done to offend him?
It hasn't done. That's why it offends him.
Right. It's not bearing any fruit. It's not in leaf, or it's in leaf. It's not in fruit. Which is kind of funny too, because Mark makes a point to say, well, it's not the season for fruit. And Jesus is like, then no one gets fruit from you ever again. And there's something about that that's kind of scary if you're looking for a metaphor, as well, I better bear some fruit.
Right.
And then the next thing he does is he goes into the temple and says, now this is important because it's a sign of what kind of fruit Jesus is talking about. Like, why does he get mad with the temple?
Because they're trying to profit off of doves that aren't actual offering.
Yeah, and it's the den of robbers, and it's also related to the my house is a house of prayer for all.
The refusal of people to even come in the first place.
You're putting up these barriers and excluding and essentially you're saying, this is a place we own God. This is where you have to come to worship God,
right.
And this is how you have to worship God. And anything else is unacceptable. We own God. And one of the things I always like to say is God is in the business of destroying the boxes we put around him. And that's exactly what we see here.
I was going to say, this sounds very familiar to a lot of modern churches I've been to.
Right? Seriously.
Interesting.
You have to come in here. And you have to do it the way we do it.
Follow our core principles, because this is what we stand for.
And you better read it the way we read it. We won't accept any other interpretation.
You can't be on leadership if you don't agree.
Right. There's a lot of, and it's very similar to what Jesus is really pissed about, violently pissed about, enough to turn tables over and chase people. And now Mark doesn't mention a whip, but in later Gospels they add a whip. Get out of here. He chases them out, and he's yelling and angry, Okay, so now let's talk about this faith to move mountains thing, because it's a little tricky, and there's an interpretive thing happening here that gets lost in translation. So it sounds like, do you remember that clip of the two old evangelical televangelist pastors talking about their private jets?
Yeah.
You ever see that clip? You should go look it up. It's ridiculous. And it comes, that idea comes from this, if you just delude yourself enough and then pray for it, if you believe with your heart that God's going to give you $1 million, then it'll happen. And it's that is bad theology. That is not, but it comes from this text. If you say to that mountain, if you pray for that mountain to move, and you believe in your heart that it'll move, then it'll do it. And
I was going to say, that's the interpretation I've heard of that specific. You see that phrase, faith to move mountains, on white girl tattoos and.
Yeah, by teaching you how to make a ladder or
Christian,
fly on an airplane.
Basic white girl, PSL, autumn girl, fall, whatever.
So here's the more accurate and nuanced interpretation of that. We lose something in the English translation. Remember, this was written in ancient Greek. It's what Jesus is more closely saying is something along the lines of, if God is calling you to move mountains, I know it seems impossible, but if God's calling you to move mountains, pick up a shovel. That's a closer interpretation to what's actually being said. And the same thing with, like, you know, hey, if you really believe that God is calling you to move mountains, then get in the mountain moving business and start cooperating with what God is doing.
Learn construction. Become a site manager.
Right.
Build things.
Well, and God will and you will be cooperating with a power that is bigger than you. You know, that's the implication. And we hear it a little more closely in the second phrase. If you want to be forgiven, then you need to be in the forgiving business.
Right.
Ugh.
If you want forgiveness from God, then you better start forgiving.
But it's gross. I can't help but tie this like socially, especially like family matters where you're bickering with a sibling, which never happens with me. But you hear so many like, I haven't talked to her in 15 years and I don't know why. Well, you do know why. It's because you're either terrified of her or you said something terrible to her. There's this whole, you're always thinking about it. You're always, and it's grinding on you, and it causes divorces, and it causes horrible things in life, and it causes like decay. And
I was working for a pastor before I was ordained, and we butt heads pretty strong, and I walked away from that feeling very wronged, you know, and like, you know, it's awkward because I became a pastor, and so you see each other,
Right.
And I remember the first couple of times we saw each other, I was just like, I don't have it in me to even deal with this guy. So I just ghosted him. I think literally I was talking with somebody and he was like walking and he saw me and was like waving and I just was like, staring straight at this guy I'm talking to. I'm not even pretending to see you, and just ghosted him. And some time went by and I relaxed a little bit in that. And then eventually like he just kind of came up to me and like, hey man, we got to squash this. And like he was a good example of like, if you want forgiveness, be in the forgiving business. Like he was willing to, he started with owning his stuff and like, hey man, I think I wronged you and I think we butt heads. I think there was some stuff going on with you and stuff going on with me and maybe we can like, and it worked. We were able, you know, he's still like, we're not like best friends or anything, but like, now when we see each other, we'll be like, oh, hey, good to see you, you know, fellow clergy, my colleague. And it's a good example. Like he wants forgiveness, and so he was being in the forgiving business, you know? And so he extended forgiveness to me before I even had the wherewithal to ask for it, you know? Right. And like that's kind of what this translation is saying. So now let's combine it all, okay? So fig trees not bearing fruit. And Jesus won't tolerate that.
Even though we know it's not supposed to.
Well, so the next story gives us, if we're using that as a metaphor, it begs the question, so what kind of fruit ought we be bearing? Then Jesus does this thing to indicate the type of fruit you ought to be bearing is the type that welcomes all nations into the presence of God and does not exclude people or keep the, you know, and the feeding metaphor, you know, like what kind of fruit? The kind that feeds people, not excludes them.
Right.
Because things that don't feed people have no place in my kingdom, you know? So there's a statement going on there. Things that don't feed people and exclude them, and there's also the literal sacrifices would have been eaten. They would have smoked them and ate them. You know, so like literally feeding and also the metaphor of feeding. And then we have this, so like essentially I think the tying the knot on all of this would be like, hey, modern church, you want people to come and worship God? You want people to come into your building and join you for worship, okay? You want to fill this church with people? You need to be in the people-filling business. Like if you want God to fill the church, then you have to be filling people, you know? Like like we lost this
people filling part and just
we
business
lost
part.
This narrative that is throughout our entire faith that is, remember that the point of this is that you will find life through service. If you want to be fed by God, then you need to go out and be in the feeding business. If you want to be uplifted by God, then you need to be in the business of uplifting God's people wherever they are. You know, and remember, God's people is all nations.
Is the important part of that too. Because I think a lot of times people get really hung up on the like, okay, like I'm going to go out and I'm going to feed people, but I'm going to do it in the ways that I'm comfortable and in the ways that I want to be fed and in my church rooms and in my church buildings. And, you know, like maybe if we...
Well, and like the other metaphor, like God is on the move, man.
Right.
Like all throughout this, like Jesus never stays in one place for very long.
That's why there's so many stories.
He literally stays outside of Jerusalem in Bethany. Like so he's walking into Jerusalem every day, and then he's like he's on the move, man. He's not in the temple doing this stuff all the time.
Get your ass out the building with all the same people you've been around for your entire time.
It's like if you want to follow Jesus, then you're gonna have to follow him. Like he's on the move. Our God is out there, not in here. Well, I mean, our God is in here too, although we seem to have deafened ourselves to his voice in a lot of ways. But like God is mostly out there because that out there is a much bigger part of God's creation and God's kingdom. And so like, you know, I think the message here is if we want to cooperate with this God, if we want our prayers answered and we want to be a part of God's kingdom, well, then first of all, we need to go to where God is, and God is with the lowly. God's with the poor in spirit, literally poor, downtrodden, confused, anxious, mental illness. Like that's where God is most. God's with those people. That's where Jesus hangs out the most. So if we want to be with God and we want God to fill us up, then we need to follow God to those places, and we need to be in the places filling those places up with whatever God is asking us to give. And when we do that, we'll find that when we practice forgiveness, we receive forgiveness. When we practice mountain moving, God moves mountains for us. So, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.